By the end of the 1870s, one company controlled roughly 90% of the oil refined in the United States. Not 90% of a city. Not 90% of a market. 90% of the light, because in that world, refined oil meant kerosene, and kerosene was what stood between ordinary families and the dark. The company was Standard Oil. The man behind it was a quiet Baptist bookkeeper from Cleveland named John D. Rockefeller, a man who never shouted, rarely explained himself, wrote down every cent he ever touched, and built, before his 40th birthday, the most complete private monopoly the modern world has ever seen. It took the United States 40 years to bring him down. In May 1911, the Supreme Court ordered Standard Oil shattered into 34 separate companies, the biggest forced breakup in business history. And then came the twist that still makes economists wince. The breakup made him richer. Within about 2 years, the pieces were worth roughly double what the whole had been, and Rockefeller's fortune swelled toward $900 million, in the region of 2% of the entire American economy. The punishment was the payday. This is the story of how one man came to own American oil, the bet on refining when everyone else was drilling, the secret railroad deals that armed the machine, the 6 weeks in which he swallowed an entire city's industry, the legal invention that gave the English language the word antitrust, and the daughter of a man he ruined, who sat down with a filing cabinet full of documents and did what Congress, the courts, and 3 presidents could not. Because this is not really a story about oil. It is a story about scale, what it builds, what it crushes, and what happens when a country finally decides it has had enough. Start with the man, because the machine is unimaginable without him. John Davison Rockefeller was born in 1839 in upstate New York, the son of 2 people who might have been designed as opposites. His father, William Big Bill, was a traveling peddler of quack medicines, a charming confidence man who vanished for months at a time, and by one neighbor's recollection, boasted that he cheated his own sons at every chance to make them sharp. His mother, Eliza, was a devout Baptist who raised the children on thrift, scripture, and silence about their father. From one parent, John learned how money is taken. From the other, he learned how it is kept. He spent the rest of his life keeping it. At 16, in September 1855, after weeks of walking Cleveland's business district in the summer heat and being turned away door after door, he was hired as an assistant bookkeeper at a produce shipping firm. For the rest of his life, through the monopoly, the billions, the infamy, he celebrated the anniversary of that hiring as job day with more feeling than his own birthday. He bought a small red notebook, called it Ledger A, and recorded everything. Every cent earned, every cent spent, every cent given to the church. He kept that ledger like a relic until he died. It is the whole man in one object, a person for whom the numbers were never a means to the money. The numbers were the point. Then, in August 1859, in the hills of western Pennsylvania, a former railway conductor named Edwin Drake drilled a hole about 70 feet deep and struck oil, and the numbers went insane. What followed was one of the great manias of the century. Farmland that had been worthless sold for fortunes. Boomtowns appeared in months and vanished in a few years. And the price of crude oil swung like a hanged rope, from around $10 a barrel at moments of scarcity to mere cents at moments of glut, because there was no way to control how much came out of the ground. Every new gusher made every existing well less valuable. Drilling was not a business. It was a lottery in which winning the jackpot lowered the jackpot. Rockefeller, by then a young commission merchant in Cleveland, looked at the frenzy and saw what almost nobody else saw. The money was not in the hole in the ground. Whoever pumped it, all of that unstable, chaotic crude had to pass through one narrow gate on its way to the world's lamps, the refinery. Crude prices gyrated wildly. The margin for turning crude into kerosene was steadier, and for a disciplined operator, controllable. So in 1863, he put his money into a Cleveland refinery, and in February 1865, at the age of 25, he bid $72,500 at auction to buy out his own senior partners and take control. He later called it the day that determined his career. The oil rush was 3,000 men digging for gold. Rockefeller had quietly bought the assay office. And then he did something that sounds boring and was actually the foundation of everything. He ran the refinery properly. Nobody else did. Refining in the 1860s was a slapdash trade of leaky barrels, wasted byproducts, and casual bookkeeping. Rockefeller attacked waste the way other men attacked competitors. When barrels were expensive, Standard built its own barrel works and bought its own timber, kiln drying the wood first, because dry wood was lighter and cheaper to haul, and cut the cost of a barrel by more than half. He hired his own plumbers. He found buyers or uses for the byproducts other refiners dumped. In his old age, he loved to tell the story of watching a machine solder cans of kerosene with 40 drops of solder, and asking whether it could be done with 38. 38 leaked, 39 held. Standard used 39 drops multiplied by millions of cans. The company's very name was the sales pitch. In an age when badly refined kerosene could flare and set houses ablaze, Standard Oil promised a standard product, every gallon, every time. In January 1870, he folded the operation into a new corporation, the Standard Oil Company of Ohio, capitalized at $1 million, with Rockefeller holding the largest stake. At that moment, it controlled roughly 1/10 of American refining. 1/10. Hold that number, because within about 9 years it becomes 9/10, and the way that happens is the reason this company ends up in front of the Supreme Court. Now watch the machine, because its real fuel was never oil, it was freight. Everything Standard shipped crude in, kerosene out, moved by rail, and the railroads of the 1870s were locked in ruinous rate wars, desperate for one thing above all: steady, predictable volume. Rockefeller's partner Henry Flagler, who would later take his Standard fortune and build modern Florida, understood the trade perfectly. Standard could promise the railroads what no one else could: a guaranteed, enormous, regular flow of barrels, by some accounts 60 carloads a day, evenly loaded, no surprises. In exchange, the railroads quietly handed back a slice of the published freight rate. A rebate. Feel the geometry of that. The discount lowered Standard's costs. Lower costs meant Standard could sell cheaper and grow. Growth meant more volume. More volume meant a bigger discount. Every turn of the wheel powered the next turn. Rockefeller's rivals were not competing against a better refiner. They were competing against a flywheel and paying full price for the privilege. Rebates were secret, resented, and in the 1870s, not clearly illegal. What came next was something else entirely. In early 1872, a scheme took shape under a deliberately forgettable name: the South Improvement Company. On paper, it was a Pennsylvania shell with vague powers. In substance, it was a private treaty between the major railroads and a ring of large refiners, Standard chief among them. The published freight rates on oil would roughly double. Members of the ring would get huge rebates off those inflated rates. And then came the clause that people at the time could barely believe when it leaked: the drawback. For oil shipped by refiners outside the ring, a portion of the freight charge would be paid over to the ring. Read that again slowly. Every barrel a competitor shipped would generate cash for Standard Oil. Your rival's business becomes your revenue. And as a bonus, the railroads would share the waybills, so the ring could see exactly who was shipping what to whom, at what price. It was, even by the freewheeling standards of the Gilded Age, breathtaking. One contemporary in the oil country called the scheme an anaconda, and the name stuck. Because the scheme leaked. In February 1872, word reached the oil regions of Pennsylvania, The drillers, the small refiners, the towns that lived on crude, and the region simply erupted. Thousands of producers packed into torchlit meetings. They organized a union, embargoed every member of the ring, and shut off the crude. Newspapers printed the members' names like a wanted list. Petitions poured into Harrisburg and Washington. A congressional committee took up the affair, and by April, the Pennsylvania legislature had revoked the company's charter. The South Improvement Company died without ever shipping a single barrel under its contracts. On paper, Rockefeller had been rooted, and this is where the story turns cold. Because while the scheme was collapsing in public, Rockefeller had already used it in private. Put yourself behind the desk of a Cleveland refiner in those same weeks, February and March of 1872. The rumors say the railroads have signed with a secret ring. The published rates are about to double. Your margins, thin already, are about to vanish. And then John D. Rockefeller comes to call soft-spoken, patient, unfailingly polite, and offers to buy your refinery. He opens Standard's books and shows you his costs, which are lower than yours will ever be. He offers you cash, or, if you are wise, stock in Standard Oil. One rival later recalled him saying in that gentle voice that he had ways of making money that others knew nothing of. You can fight against a competitor whose freight costs you cannot see, backed by railroads you depend on. Or you can sell. They sold. In about 6 weeks, Standard Oil absorbed some 22 of the 26 refineries in Cleveland. History remembers it as the Cleveland Massacre, a massacre in which no shot was fired and every victim signed the paperwork. Many sellers went to their graves swearing they had been robbed, paid a fraction of what their works had cost to build. Rockefeller answered, with perfect actuarial calm, that most of those refineries were obsolete junk in a dying margin, and that he had paid fairly for assets whose real value was collapsing. The bitter irony is that both things were true, and that the handful of sellers who took stock instead of cash became, in time, some of the wealthiest families in America. Cleveland was the template and Standard ran it across the country. Pittsburgh, Philadelphia, New York, the oil regions themselves. Buy the best rivals, close the worst, keep the deals secret. Some acquired firms kept their old names for years, competing theatrically with a parent the public did not know they had. Standard built its own fleets of tank cars, bought terminals, pushed into pipelines. And when an upstart called Tidewater built a daring long-distance pipeline over the mountains in 1879 to escape the railroads entirely, Standard answered by building its own lines and eventually coming to terms. Control the refining, then control the roads to the refining, then control the roads from it. By around 1879, the number was reached. Roughly 90% of American refining capacity answered, one way or another, to Standard Oil. American kerosene lit lamps from Ohio to Asia, and most of it passed through one company's hands. And here is the uncomfortable truth that the villain version of this story always skips: the customer one. Through the 1870s, the price of kerosene collapsed from roughly 26 cents a gallon at the start of the decade to single digits within about 10 years, and quality rose. Light, real light after sunset, stopped being a luxury. That fall in price is Standard's entire defense, and it is not nothing. Rockefeller went to his grave believing he had rescued a suicidal industry from chaos and given the poor man cheap light. He once wrote that Standard was refining oil for the poor man, and he must have it cheap and good. The question the next 40 years of this story asks is whether it matters how the price fell, whether a low price paid at the counter excuses what happened behind it. But first, Standard had a problem, and it was not moral, it was mechanical. Under the law of the age, owning 90% of an industry was, strictly speaking, impossible. An Ohio corporation in that era could not simply own shares in corporations chartered in other states. Standard's empire, dozens of nominally separate companies across the map, was held together by handshakes, trusteeships, and quiet understandings, a legal haze that would not survive serious scrutiny. The empire existed. The law had no container for it. So Standard's lawyer built one. His name was Samuel C.T. Dodd, in history, has a taste for irony, because Dodd was an oil country lawyer from the region Standard had steamrolled, a man who had once denounced railroad discrimination in his youth. Now, as Standard's counsel, he reached back to one of the oldest instruments in English law, the trust, the humble device by which property is held for widows and orphans, and scaled it to the size of an empire. In January 1882, the shareholders of Standard Oil and its constellation of companies, around 40 of them, handed their shares to a board of 9 trustees, Rockefeller at the head, receiving trust certificates in exchange. The trustees now controlled everything, everywhere as one machine, while the corporate law books showed only separate companies in separate states, each innocently local. Dodd, famously, refused to own a share of it. He took his salary and nothing else, insisting a lawyer's advice should never be colored by his holdings. He then spent years explaining to legislatures that the colossus he had personally designed was nothing sinister. The invention spread like a patent everyone could steal. Within a few years there was a sugar trust, a whiskey trust, a lead trust, a cottonseed oil trust. The word trust, Dodd's word, the widows and orphans word, became America's word for monopoly itself. Farmers cursed it, cartoonists drew it as an octopus, and in 1890 Congress passed the Sherman Antitrust Act, antitrust, a law aimed, in its very name, at the structure Samuel Dodd had drawn up for John D. Rockefeller. Standard Oil was now the named enemy of an entire body of American law. Remember that law. It takes 21 years to land. The first blow came from Ohio, whose Supreme Court ruled in 1892 that the trust violated the terms of Standard of Ohio's charter and ordered the arrangement wound up. Standard responded the way water responds to a rock. It slow-walked the dissolution for years, and then found a better container. New Jersey, hungry for incorporation fees, had rewritten its laws to let one corporation own shares in others. The holding company, made legal at last. In 1899, the whole empire reformed as Standard Oil of New Jersey, everything under one roof, this time in broad daylight. The trust was dead. The monopoly had simply changed clothes. And its creator walked away. By 1897, Rockefeller, still in his 50s, had quietly withdrawn from day-to-day management, leaving the machine to lieutenants. He played golf. He gave away money on a scale no one had ever attempted. He was the richest man in the world. His company was untouchable, and the century was turning in his favor. He had no idea that the most dangerous enemy of his life was a schoolteacher's salary journalist at a monthly magazine, and that he had made her an enemy himself 30 years earlier, when she was 14 years old. Go back to 1872, to the oil regions, to the winter of the South Improvement Company. In a house near Titusville lived a tank builder and small producer named Franklin Tarbell, one of the men who packed those torchlit meetings, one of the thousands who embargoed the ring. His daughter Ida watched her father come home changed that winter. The open, confident world of the oil country replaced by something guarded and bitter. The family's fortunes were bruised in the long Standard years that followed. Later, her father's business partner, crushed by debt in the losing fight against the machine, took his own life, and Franklin Tarbell mortgaged the family home to cover the firm's obligations. Ida Tarbell carried all of it out of the oil country with her, not as rage, but as a question she spent decades learning how to ask properly. She was, by any measure, formidable. One of the only women in her college class, a school teacher, then a writer in Paris living on magazine work, then one of the star journalists at McClure's magazine, where her serialized lives of Napoleon and Lincoln had made her a national name. Around the turn of the century, McClures went looking for a way to write about the trusts, the defining economic fact of the age, and settled on telling the story of one, the mother of them all, Standard Oil. The writer they chose was the daughter of the oil regions. What she did next is the second hinge of this story, and the reason it ends the way it does. She did not write an attack, she wrote an audit. Standard Oil had spent 30 years being investigated, sued and subpoenaed state courts, federal committees, the Ohio litigation, the endless rate cases, and each proceeding had deposited testimony, contracts, and exhibits into the public record like sediment. Nobody had ever read it all. Tarbell read it all. For years, she and her researcher worked through the accumulated paper of 3 decades, cross-checking rumor against sworn testimony. She even interviewed a sitting lord of the company itself, Henry H. Rogers, one of Standard's most feared executives. The introduction arranged through his friend Mark Twain, who sat with her repeatedly, urbane and candid, apparently confident the company's story would charm on the record. It did not. The history of the Standard Oil Company began running in McClures in November 1902 and stretched to 19 installments before it became a book in 1904. It reconstructed everything you have heard in this video: the rebates, the drawbacks, the South Improvement contracts, the Cleveland winter of 1872, not as accusation but as documentation, chapter after chapter of receipts. And it was devastating precisely because Tarbell refused to make it simple. She wrote openly of her admiration for the machine, its efficiency, its discipline, its genius. Her verdict when it came was all the harder for it, that the men of Standard Oil had never played fair, and that this ruined their greatness for her. The country read it, and the country's mood turned. This was the era the president himself, Theodore Roosevelt, half-mockingly christened the age of the muckrakers, and Tarbell's series was its masterpiece. The moment investigative journalism proved it could put a fact pattern in front of the public that no institution could wave away. Rockefeller never answered her in public. In private, it was said, he called her Miss Tarbell. He might have done better to read the footnotes, because a government with an election-winning appetite for trust-busting now had, laid out in 19 installments, something very close to a case file. In November 1906, the Roosevelt administration filed suit in federal court to dissolve Standard Oil of New Jersey under the Sherman Act. The proceeding was gigantic, testimony from hundreds of witnesses assembled into a record running to thousands of pages. The corporate anatomy of the empire dissected transaction by transaction, decades of rebates and acquisitions dragged into the light. Standard fought every inch up through the circuit court, all the way to the top. And on the 15th of May, 1911, the Supreme Court of the United States delivered its judgment. Standard Oil was an unreasonable restraint of trade, and it would be dissolved. The holding company had 6 months to let go of everything, 34 separate companies, cut loose to compete with one another. The greatest industrial empire on earth had been broken by the state. The newspapers reached for the language of revolutions. And the man himself, Rockefeller, long retired, was on the golf course when word arrived, and by one well-worn account, he turned to the priest he was playing with and offered him the best financial advice of the century: buy Standard Oil. Whether or not he said it, it was the correct call, and here is the mechanism because it matters. For years, Standard had been a black box, secretive, hated, legally besieged, its shares traded on trust and fear. The dissolution forced the box open. 34 companies now stood in daylight, each with its own books, and investors could finally see what had been inside: pipelines, refineries, oil fields, tank fleets, marketing networks, assets the market had never properly priced. And each existing shareholder received shares in all of them, in proportion. Within about 2 years, the combined value of the fragments had roughly doubled. Rockefeller, who still held around a quarter of it all, watched the government's punishment carry his fortune toward $900 million, by common reckoning around 2% of the American economy of the day, a share of national wealth no private person has approached since. The Supreme Court had made him the richest man in modern history. And the timing turned the irony into farce. Standard's actual monopoly had already been eroding for a decade. The great Texas gushers after 1901 had raised rivals like Gulf and Texaco beyond its reach, and electric light was coming for kerosene, the product the whole empire had been built to sell. But just as the old business dimmed, a new machine arrived to drink what Standard had once burned off as waste: the automobile. Gasoline demand exploded in the very years the fragments went free, and the fragments rode it. Their names tell you how that went. Standard of New Jersey became Exxon. Standard of New York became Mobil. Standard of California became Chevron. Standard of Indiana became Amoco. Standard of Ohio ended up inside BP. And in 1999, two of the largest fragments, Exxon and Mobil, merged back together, reassembling a piece of the old trust under one roof, with regulators' blessing 88 years after the court had cut it apart. Rockefeller spent his last decades giving the fortune away, and even his giving was industrial. More than $500 million deployed with the same system he had brought to refining. A great university built in Chicago, Medical Research Institutes, a foundation chartered in 1913, campaigns that helped drive hookworm out of the American South. The man vilified as the octopus quietly became one of the founders of modern public health, and by many measures, the greatest philanthropist of his era, handing shiny dimes to strangers while his money rewired medicine. When the financial system itself nearly died in the panic of 1907, it was Rockefeller who deposited $10 million to steady the banks and pledged half his fortune to hold America's credit, a story we tell elsewhere on this channel. He died in 1937, at 97, within reach of a goal he had held for decades, to live to 100 on a fortune built from light. So what does the story of Standard Oil actually teach? The machinery version, not the morality play. First, monopolies are built on boring things, not genius products, freight rates, solder drops, barrel timber, cost sheets. Standard did not out-invent anyone. It out-counted everyone, and then used its size to buy advantages, the rebates, the drawbacks that no efficiency could match. That is the permanent trick of scale. It starts as a reward for being better and quietly becomes a weapon for staying biggest. The customer's price can fall the entire time. Both of Standard's truths were true at once: cheaper light for everyone, and a locked door for anyone who tried to compete. Every monopoly since has offered the same trade, and every regulator since has had to decide whether the price at the counter settles the question. Second, the paper wins in the end. Standard was not brought down by a rival, a strike, or a crash. It was brought down by its own documents, 30 years of contracts and sworn testimony, read in full at last by the one person with the patience and the personal reason to read them. Tarbell invented the method that watchdogs of every kind still use: skip the adjectives, assemble the record. Institutions that cannot survive their own paper trail are living on borrowed time. And third, breakups are not death sentences. Sometimes they are the opposite. The pieces of Standard Oil were worth more apart than together, grew faster apart than together, and some of them eventually re-merged anyway. Which is worth remembering today, whenever the question returns, as it has returned loudly, in our own age of platforms that deliver lower prices while owning the road every rival must travel. The argument you hear about those companies is, almost word for word, the argument of 1911. We have run this experiment before. The empire was broken, the shareholders got richer, the industry grew, and the fight over what scale is allowed to do simply moved on to the next machine. Rockefeller built the machine of the age and was punished into history's largest fortune. But 4 years before the court broke his trust, the entire American financial system nearly collapsed in 3 weeks, and the man who single-handedly stopped it wasn't Rockefeller. It was a 70-year-old banker with a famous temper, working out of his own private library. That is the story of the panic of 1907, and we have told it. Sources for this account include the records and opinions of the federal antitrust case against Standard Oil of New Jersey and the Supreme Court's 1911 decision, the published contracts and congressional testimony surrounding the South Improvement Company, Ida Tarbell's history of the Standard Oil Company and her memoirs, Rockefeller's own published reminiscences and correspondence, contemporary reporting from the oil region's press, and the major documented biographies drawing on the Rockefeller archives.